It's Leo time, y'all. We are entering into Leo season on the 22nd. But before we get there, before the sun makes its way into its sign that it likes to be in, we got a little drama in the mix because Mercury turns retrograde in the fire sign. And then the time that the sun makes its way into Leo, we're going to be having some tension as there'll be a square between Venus and Mars, who will also be meeting the South Node. And with Chiron in the mix, this is a time in which our sense of self, our inner light, will be triggered a bit as we are asked to review what it is that we are beholden to. How do we understand and see ourselves? What are the kind of stories we tell ourselves and have been told to us? And if it's time to rewrite the stories, if it's time to rewrite the narratives, then can we reflect upon how our sense of self was constructed and what it looks like to not allow others to dictate who we are, but really sit in our light and let that inner light shine. So this is the weekly forecast for July 16th through 22nd, which I say is welcome in Leo season. Let your little light shine. Welcome back to Yappin with the Stars, the show where I talk about life and spirit with the help of the planets, stars, and zodiacs. And a little bit of common sense thrown in there as well. Now, I am your host and guide, Dr. Nicole Rouse, astrologer, anthropologist, artist, and overall dreamer. And here we do astrology and anthropology my way, grounded in the body, tied to spirit, and connected to the world that we're actually living in. Now, every Wednesday, we check into the chaos we call society and ask two questions. What's the cosmos showing us this week? And what are we being called to move, create, burn, build, or review? Now, before we get into it, I want to remind folks that I am an actual practicing astrologer. So that means that I do one-on-one work with folks, along with organizational consulting, working with astrology as a tool of assessment in strategy and strategizing and visioning. And so if you've been interested in knowing more about my work and even working one-on-one with me, then check out my website, Dr. Nicole Rouse. Then check out my website, drnicolerouse.com/astrology. And so there you'll see the various astrological assessments that I offer through my Embodied Futures Lab. I have readings that are individual that focus on different aspects of your life. So like graduation or life transition, understanding your spiritual gifts, to the kind of foundational journey to self natal reading. And I also offer couple readings. And the one I want to highlight is my parent-child reading that I'll be talking about more as we're getting into the concept of the family and what does it mean for us to kind of rethink the foundations of our kind of society by rethinking the foundations of what constructs us, which is the family. We're actually going to talk about that this week with the transits that are going on, because this is an ongoing conversation since Jupiter is in Cancer and it is still in that square with Saturn in Aries, who is now retrograde. So we'll get into that in a second. But if you're interested, again, in this kind of one-on-one work with me, and or you were interested in seeing how I use and work with astrology in consulting and strategy for organizations, institutions, and the like, then again, check out my website, check out the Embodied Futures Lab, my astrology assessments, and reach out. I do offer free consultation calls for folks who are interested in working more with me one-on-one and in group settings, along with facilitation and leading seminars and retreats. So check me out there. And if you're interested in actually kind of more of my praxis, which is my Embodied Strategic Dreaming, then check me out on my Patreon. That's where I am beta testing a number of different seminars and concepts and different ways that I'm kind of working with the body and dreaming as a praxis of liberation and having a lot of fun doing it. This past weekend, on Sunday, I did a sunrise set and folks joined me on Zoom. I had a curated playlist, some prompts, and over an hour, kind of basically it's like my own radio show, but it's a way to work with music, the body, and giving ourselves permission to be curious and play. Because when we allow that curiosity in, that's how we can world build. That's how we allow our dreams to become strategy. And in that strategizing, we can then build new worlds. So go ahead and check that out for more. And I will be having a new seminar coming up that I will be releasing next week. So if you're interested in the seminars, I just had one this past Saturday that went really well on understanding your spiritual gifts with astrology. I had about 15 folks on Zoom. We went for about 3 hours and had a good time kind of talking through and talking about the concept of spirit, spirituality, and then what our charts help can show us and help us understand about our own humanity. So the next series I will be doing is a three-parter that folks can take either individually or as a group. And it's called The Self is the Spell, Reclaiming the Human Through Ritual, Body, and Spirit. And so it's a three-part seminar series that we're going to first engage with the topics and concepts of death and the ancestors. And then from there, we'll go into altars in you. So what is an altar? How your body is the first altar. And what does that mean then to not only see the body as an altar, but actually have spaces of kind of praise and veneration. What does that mean and look like? And then from there, going into protection and cleansing. So like I said, I'll have more information about that next week when I release that new series. But if you're interested in more, go ahead and sign up for my newsletter. I'll have it in the show notes through my website and or my Substack, and you can find out more information there. Okay? All right. Now, let's get into this week's forecast. Now, last week I wasn't feeling that great. I feel a lot better this week, so I got some more energy. So we're going to go back to my kind of format that I've been playing with since I started the show, with the weekly forecast, then a little bit of astrology 101 before I start yapping and talking my shit, okay? And so this week's forecast really, again, is a continuing story, but this is a story that Mercury is leading. And I find this really interesting because Mercury will be going retrograde later on this week. And last year, Mercury went retrograde in fire signs only. And we're seeing Mercury still in fire signs doing its retrograde. And I think that's important for us to remember because the elements do matter as well, especially since the outer planets that I've been talking about for a while, which is Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, have all moved signs. And when the outer planets that are generational planets move signs, that indicates massive change in society, right? And we can feel it, we can see it. You don't have to be a mystic to understand that we are in a time of crossroads in which we're going to have to make new decisions and really start to ask ourselves what kind of societies we want to live in. And with Mercury in fire in Leo right now going retrograde, and then Uranus just moving into Gemini, and Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury, and Gemini, along with Virgo, rules Mercury. Mercury really is in charge right now. So this is going to be a week that's going to get highlighted in terms of communication, transportation, but also the ways in which you talk to and have been talked to about yourself. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's get into it. Now, on the 16th, we have Venus in Gemini starting to square Mars in Virgo. Okay, so this square is a little bit loose. We've been here before, and it's going to get exact by the 22nd. So we're building up to this kind of tension in the sky in which Venus is in the sign of communication, and we're being asked to kind of reflect and review upon Venetian things, which is going to be relationships, concepts of justice, right? In the ways that we are constructing and thinking and talking about these things. Now, Mercury is in the mix here because it'll be sextiling Venus. So what Venus is really doing is asking herself, right, as asking all of us to really reflect upon and get a little bit more clarity about what our wants and needs are in relationships. How are we defining love, right? How are we defining the sense of justice? And with Mercury and Leo, this is about fire and passion. And so the visions that we have, can we have the courage to speak them, to bring them into fruition? And this is alongside Uranus being in Gemini right now, having just ingressed there on July 7th. There is a way that we are also kind of being forced to reflect upon these concepts because Uranus is saying it's going to change. We are in a time of change once again, and we're changing the ways that we do communicate. We are changing our relationship to concepts of love because we're changing our relationship to technology once again. So do we understand what it means to be human as we are now engaging with other forms of life that humans are constructing and creating, right? So if humans are now these kind of creators of forms of life outside of what we can make, in our bodies through the birthing process, then can we reflect upon and get clear about who we are and how that shows up in these creations? Because if not, then we end up giving our authority and power once again to an external entity. I've been saying this a lot. I'm going to keep saying it because this is very loud, especially since Saturn has now just went retrograde. Remember that. Neptune is retrograde. They're both in the sign of Aries. They'll both make their way into Pisces before they come back into Aries and stay at the end of the year going into next year. So this is truly a time of reflection and review through fire. And fire does what? Fire is quick. It can consume. It can burn things up, right? And if we're not careful, then it can go out of control and hit things that maybe it shouldn't have. But in the aftermath, what is left then is fertile ground. So what is going to be planted? What are we planting and why? And can we clear that rubble so that the foundation, the ground, the dirt itself can be sustained, right? Through new ways, through new visions, through new creativity and passion. So Saturn is reminding us, and Neptune, right, is that this is a time of reflection because you can't create if you also do not reflect, because all you'll then be doing is reacting versus creating. And those aren't two different energies. And so on the 16th, we're starting this kind of energy because then on the 17th, what we're doing then is getting triggered. Okay, we're going to be triggered again because Chiron's in the mix. Again, fire is here. So do we know how to work with fire, since outer planet-wise, we are moving into a time of fire and air, which means we're moving into a time of activation. So what is being activated? Who is being activated? And in that activation, what is being created or reproduced? So that's the question here. Because on the 17th, what we then see is the moon getting closer to Chiron. We talked about Chiron before. Chiron is a dwarf planet. It's the wounded healer. It is the point in our charts that helps us understand generationally kind of where there has been a wounding of our sense of self in one way, shape, or form in early childhood. And if we don't face that, we then kind of are playing out a life in reaction to it. But once we can face that wound, once we can face that pain, then it can be a great source of healing. And right now, because Chiron is in Aries, we are all being asked to look at the ways our sense of self has been wounded in one way, shape, or form. And with the moon being there, the moon meeting up with Chiron, right? And that will then be in a square to the sun in Cancer. This is all feelings, y'all. Feelings and inflammation, all right? Because at the same day that we get the moon and Chiron hanging out, and they're going to be in a tension with the sun in Cancer, Mercury goes retrograde in Leo, in fire. So fire and water. Let's talk about this for a minute. I want you to ask yourself how you understand your sense of self, and how that sense of self was influenced by and constructed through the family. And I'm saying that because Sun in Cancer. Cancer is the family. Cancer is the moon, the mother, mothering. It is birth and death. It is creation and destruction. It is the land and shore. The ancestors lie in the water. The humans lie at the shore, and our connection, right, between the two is literally our bloodlines, our family, how we are, who we are birthed in and through, and then how that family structure is constructed, which then determines then who your people are. And I always say, when I talk with clients, when I do any kind of work with folks in seminars and talks and stuff, when we're talking about this idea of deconstruction or abolition or any kind of anti-oppression, and we are trying to find new ways of living and being, we have to understand what and who constructed us to begin with, the institutions that groomed us to understand ourselves in particular identities that we then perform. And if we don't perform them a certain way, then there is a backlash. There is a consequence, right? The first institution to do that is the family. So Sun in Cancer, Your sense of self. Sun is your ego. Sun is your light. Sun is your drive. Sun is what your purpose in life. And this is why I really push back on this idea of ego deaths and like you have to kill your ego. Who the hell does that benefit? Why am I going to kill something that I'm still trying to figure out and engage with, right? I really think that when they're talking about killing the ego, what you're doing is lifting the veil of the different ways you have been groomed to perform who you are supposed to be. And as you get deeper in the body and grapple with it and get curious and live, there is a way that, and I'm using Du Bois' concept of the veil, you have to lift that veil. And in that lifting, right, you are shedding, you are killing those constructs of self that were not you. It was the individual put upon you. So to me, deconstruction is actually coming in and finding the self, finding your ego, and pairing that with your moon, because the sun is your ego, the moon is your physical, emotional body. And with the moon in Aries this day, next to Chiron, and Mercury in another fire sign retrograding, and that is how we communicate. Fire is the most emotional element. So this is a time of getting emotional and dealing with your emotions, y'all, because you will be feeling whether you want to or not. Especially my fire signs. My fire signs, I'm going to be really adamant about this, especially as we enter into fire and air. You will have to be able to engage and acknowledge your feelings because your body will be reacting. It will get hot, right? It will get irritated. It will be uncomfortable. It will get inflamed. This is for everybody, but I'm saying for major fire signs, okay? For major fire sign placements in your chart, aspects to fire signs. This is an activation. But do we know how to work with our fire, right? Do we know how to work with our passion? I'm a Leo sun. It's a Leo North Node, and I got my Scorpio. I'm a Scorpio rising, right? And there is a way my whole life, like I don't know how not to feel. I don't know how not to be animated in some way, shape, or form. Like me talking right now, like I am telling myself to be very calm so that I can get this information out and not talk too fast and not forget something. That's why I write things down and looking at my notes, right? But even as I start to talk, I don't know how to feel heat. I don't know how to get excited, and I don't know how to have that not expressed in how I talk and what I do, right? And so growing up, my sense of self, though, was one in which I was always taught, especially through my family. And then the other institution that definitely raised me, besides the family, which is school, which is all of us, right, in some way, shape, or form, was always telling me I was too much, right? Bring it down. Don't do so much. And it didn't help that I was 6 foot by the time I was in fifth grade, and I was 6'3" by the time I was 14, right? So there is this way that my body was completely seen. And so having such a visible body at such a young age, so then I was always seen as older until I got to like 18. And then all of a sudden I was seen as a kid again. It was been very strange with that as well. And that's a whole thing about being bred as a Black woman in America. That's a whole other conversation, right? But there is a way, right, that my sense of self and my understanding of my passion and drive was heavily shaped by the perception of others. So now, in my age I am now, 43, about to be 44, I've gone through all these astrological transits, right? There is a way that as I lift those veils, right, of all the supposed tos, lift the veils of the identities that are put upon me to get into my ego, to get into my sun. Your sun matters, y'all. I don't care what sign it is in. That is how you express your light. That is how you express your drive. That is how you express your spirit. Okay? That is you. What this transit is asking us to do, right, especially since Mercury will be going retrograde, is to review the ways your sense of self has been constructed through others' perceptions. And what would it look like for you then to own that yourself, own your own head? Chiron, Aries. And as the moon transits through, that's a quick transit. Moon only takes about 2.5 days in each of the signs, but it doesn't mean a quick transit doesn't mean it's not going to have an impact. So on the 17th, I want you to feel your feelings and track them if you can. Okay, just take note. You can voice note, you can put it in your phone. It doesn't have to be all elaborate. As things come up, instead of judging it, get curious about it, right? If you have to, especially be around family, people who are family are those who helped raise you in some way. Okay. This includes parents, especially parents, because sun and moon are literally here. So, mother, father, it gets real literal. But if you have to be around family this week and you are feeling triggered, I want you to always say, where are my feet? Feel my feet. And then get, again, present and curious about the interaction, because who is the self that is showing up as that self is being challenged and perceived by another person's sight? And what does it look like for you to take that sight back and own your own head by owning the ways in which you understand your sense of self? Okay. Now, this is a running theme because Mercury going retrograde in Leo, and this day, there is a theme about reviewing the kind of ways we communicate and talk to ourselves. Mercury's communication. We're going to get into Mercury more in depth for my Astrology 101. But this is actually great timing because last night on my Patreon, I had a divination study session with folks, and we were going over Mercury and Uranus as a way to tell the story about, like, how do we communicate to ourselves? Where can we be inconsistent? Because Mercury is that crossroads, is that trickster energy. And then where do we naturally rebel, both individually and generationally? Now, Mercury goes retrograde for about 3 weeks this time. So we'll be retrograde in Leo until about August 11th. And Mercury retrogrades are always seen as some kind of big to-do in pop astrology. But these happen 4 times a year, 3 to 4 times a year, y'all. So this is a natural cycle of timing that I think if we understand astrological timing as another rhythm that we can engage with to understand what it means to live, then we'd understand that life is not about constantly, quote unquote, progressing to some bigger kind of ideal or bigger goal or bigger, quote unquote, success, which really is just another way we are fed consumption, right? We are told to consume our own lives by constantly pushing and going for more, never stopping, never reviewing, never contemplating, never reflecting, right? And then we wonder why we have burnout and anxiety so high. So these retrograde periods are a reminder as well from the cosmos, if we are co-creating with the cosmos, that you have to review. And so Mercury is saying you got to review you, because Leo is you, it's the heart, it's the sun. So also be mindful of your heart. How does your heart feel? Physically, spiritually. Okay, how does that heart feel? What happens if the heart leads? Right? This is love, love through fire, love through action. And so, what does it look like to take action on through reflection and review? The story of your sense of love. So on the 17th, it's getting closer squaring the sun. On the 19th, we are squaring the sun. The last thing I'll say about this kind of Chiron and Aries square, sun in Cancer moment is, what can we learn from and turn into wisdom and healing when it comes to our relationship with the family, with the father, because sun's the father, with the mother, because moon is the mother, right? And how that has shaped the self. And this is not about placing blame necessarily or, kind of getting into these very dichotomous right and wrong. It truly is a reflection and review. How has the family, how have the concept of the parent shaped us? And if that construction does not actually hold the self you are in right now, are you okay letting that go? Are you okay transmuting it and reshaping it so that the center is your perception and not somebody else's? Now, on the 22nd, we get the sun entering into Leo. And again, just like Leo with a little flair, a little drama, this is happening at the exact same time we are having an exact square between Venus and Gemini and Mars and Virgo, who will then also be right next to, or what we call conjunct, the South Node in Virgo, which means then that Mars will be opposing North Node in Pisces. And this is all happening as Mercury is sextiling Venus still. So what the hell does all this mean? Well, Mercury's in charge. Mercury's in charge right now. Why do I say that? Because Venus is in Gemini. Gemini, the air masculine side of Mercury. Mars is in Virgo, the feminine earth sign of Mercury. And the higher octave of Mercury, Uranus, just what? Made its way into Gemini. So even though Mercury is in Leo, Mercury is in the sign that only understands how to shine, because it is, again, about the self, the ego. So now Mercury can be big and bad for a minute, even as it's going through a retrograde, because Mercury is saying, whether we like it or not, the ways that we understand communication do need to shift and change. because that is what is dictating and having us in this kind of tension between our needs and wants when it comes to relationships and justice and concepts of how we talk about and communicate these ideas, and the reality of power keeping us in the same stagnant kind of knowledge production machines, right? So what does it look like for us to reassess how we understand communication, especially when it comes to our bodies? Again, we're coming back to the body here, y'all. We're coming back to having to be human, because understandings of knowledge have to involve not just the mind, but also the body, the intuition, the discernment, the sitting in the self, understanding how to work with the emotions, because your emotional body is always speaking to you. So then you have to be embodied if we are trying to have any kind of new future. Now, here's the thing. We have been fed nihilism. We have been fed doom. We have been fed these only an inevitability of the future being one or two ways, and those one or two ways are always in this dystopian kind of construction. But what's going on? We're being asked to review all that. We're being asked to ask the question, is that true? Because again, we have got Saturn and Neptune retrograde in Aries. We got fire again. Remember, earlier in the week, we are in Aries fire as well because of what's happening with Chiron in its conversation with the sun in Cancer before the sun moves over into Leo. So we are being reminded that the sense of self, our heads, the ways that we construct the body and how we engage with it has to go through a process of growing up. We are being asked to grow up. Saturn and Neptune are having us reflect and review upon, right, how we have kind of dipped our toe in this kind of ideas of self-determinism, because are we self-determining, or are we looking to new charismatic leaders, new leaders to dictate and tell us who we are? Well, right now, this review is saying, but let's have a concept and conversation about then the sense of self and how it is truly shaped. And if we move away from the grandiose big structure and understand that structure is always filtered to the individual, but that individual is constructed through the family. Well, if we can reconstitute the family, reconstitute ideas of exchange, reconstitute and re-examine the kind of logics that we're using to frame these understandings of the ways we want to kind of build these new worlds going forward. This is culture, right? This is us understanding culture differently by embodying the cultural ways that we have to be human once again. Well, then what are we constructing? Because Mars opposite the North Node in Pisces is saying that there's going to be a tension in new world building because we have to re-examine and reimagine something different, which means we're going to have to ask some hard questions about we're going to have to ask different questions about the so-called logical way we think we are doing things, because if we have been fed rationality as the only way forward as quote unquote progress, but all this rationality has gotten us as much more dehumanization, right, and degradation, then again, Mars next to the South Node, square Venus, sextiling Mercury as Mercury is retrograding, is saying, well, shit, maybe it's time we not only write new stories, but we decide that it's time that we speak for ourselves. Right? But what are we speaking into existence and why? Well, sometimes you need to go internal. Sometimes you got to internalize a bit to grapple with truly where your feet lie. And then once you can reemerge, right, after you've done the reflection, then do you allow your light to shine? Can you allow yourself to roar your way? And sometimes that roar may not always be quote unquote popular, but it is paving the way for change. And so this week really is, to me, for those who are needing some healing, but healing of your own light. And there's a way that our feelings are going to get even stronger. Our reactions are going to get stronger. Again, this is fire and air. This is reaction time. But reaction doesn't have to be volatile if we are grounded in the actual existence of our bodies. Okay. Now let's get into a little astrology 101. Since we are talking so much about Mercury, who is Mercury and what is this little planet trying to do? Okay. So Mercury is leading things right now because of what it rules and what's going on, as I said in the weekly breakdown. And so Mercury is about who we are, how we receive and perceive information, what we do with that information, and how we express ourselves once we have it. And since Mercury is in now the most expressive sign, since Mercury now is in the most expressive sign of Leo, there is an extra emphasis on how we truly learn to express ourselves. Because Mercury is the messenger. Okay, it is the mind, it's communication, it's our intellect and reasoning. It is the intellectual and emotional orientations to our life. It's the smallest planet in the solar system, so it can get the closest to the sun, but it also is the one that delivers messages, again, being the messenger. And so it is the trickster. Right? It is the one that knows how to lay a trick in order for us to get clarity about what it is we truly want. So this is why I call Mercury the crossroad. It is the place of the crossroads. It is where you lay offerings down. But when you lay an offering down at the crossroad, y'all, it's not just about laying it down and you don't do nothing. That is part one. You must do some kind of action to open up that road. So Mercury, Gemini, and Virgo, right? It's the mind and the body. So once you have thought something, the body then needs to do something. Gemini, again, Virgo. So when we think about it that way, right, and it rules Gemini and Virgo, and it's in detriment in Pisces and Sag. But Mercury is interesting because it's one of its rulers is also where it's exalted. So it's both at home and exalted in Virgo, but the same thing with the detriment. It's in detriment in Pisces and Sag, but it's also in fall in Pisces, okay? Now, the properties of Mercury is that it's dry, it's cold. And so Mercury itself can be a bit melancholic. It can be in a state of kind of melancholia. And so the element and the sign that your Mercury is in will kind of tell you how you handle that melancholy, how you handle duality of life a bit, how you sit in and work with the kind of trickster crossroads nature that happens when we're trying to communicate with others who themselves have different ways of communicating. So whose voice do you privilege and why? And again, this is this energy this week to remind us that so many of us, right, part of the ways these projects, these modern kind of nation state projects work is that it gets into our minds. It tells us the mind is somehow above the body, that you can mindfulness your way into a new life, which means that we have been taught through the colonial project to separate our Mercury. We've been taught to separate our mind, Gemini, from the body, Virgo. What has that done for us? How is your stomach? How is your understanding of your own reality? Do you believe your reality by believing yourself? And so Mercury in Leo right now, retrograde, and I think Mercury being in these fire signs retrograding for a while is having us have to sit in the fire of our life. Right? Like, what is the point of living if there's no fucking passion? What is the point of living if there's not a little adventure, right? Sag, if you're not just going to take charge and do shit off the bat. Aries, if there's not a little drama and flair and performance in our life. Leo, like fire has a purpose, just like all the other elements do. But we've only been taught fire through dominance, through the patriarch, through patriarchal understandings of creation and destruction, which is really just much more destruction. So that sun in Cancer, right? Squaring Chiron in Aries. How do we understand that we've all had woundings of our relationships to our bodies and our emotions? You know, we've all had woundings in our relationships to mothering and motherhood, regardless of how your personal mother is. It's about the larger construction of that, because we've had a lot of issues with our relationships to children. And that's also Cancer, because that's what is created is children. That is the crux of families. You know, you've got guardians, you got kids, but the relationship we have to children is so disconnected in society. Mercury is the smallest planet. It's the crossroad. It's the trickster. The man at the crossroad, depending upon the tradition you're in, can also show up as a child Why is that? Because we have to have childlike nature, a curiosity, a wonder. That is an important part of our development. When we skip childhood and childlike things and jump to the parentification, jump to the adultification, then there is a way that our society becomes sick. Our ability to communicate, our ability to understand the relationships between the mind and the body then does become disconnected. We forget our curiosity in favor of facts and figures and making things right and wrong, right? The binary comes in, but knowledge is not binary because Mercury is non-binary. It is not masculine nor feminine. It is both. Same as Uranus, a higher octave of Mercury, which is our genius. It's where we rebel. It's where we have revolution. It's where we have innovation and new ideas, and shit gets weird, right? Because shit's got to get weird sometimes in order to make something new. Otherwise, we just reproduce the same things over and over again. So when we're talking about Mercury, right, we're talking about a fundamental part of our humanity. It is. It's how we construct our cosmologies, our ideologies, the way we understand our relationship to the sacred and mundane. Because again, Mercury is the crossroad. In its history, whether it be from the Greeks or the Romans, right, it becomes a location that can navigate between the living and the dead. Because we're not supposed to be where the dead reside, right? There's a purpose to the human. And so that's why we have intermediaries. There are certain people, certain locations, certain processes that allow us to do what? Traverse that veil once again. The veil. Then we keep getting veils, the veils being lifted, veils being revealed. Other worlds, new logics. Mars next to the South Node in Virgo is going to push us to reassess the ways that we have been stagnant in our logics. We have been stagnant in the ways we even understand analysis. Because do any of these analyses actually help us get free? Free in the body, free in the mind, free in society. Okay. Venus and Gemini and that nice trine to Mercury and Leo was saying, well, shit, it's time that we construct new rhymes, new culture, new way of being. Because there is a tension here. There is a absolute tension between what we say we want and then the actions we are taking. So those two need to start meeting, and they have to meet through in what our sense of self and understanding. So do we know what we want and need? Right? Do we understand what that fire of life requires of us? Because it's a responsibility to living in life. And Saturn, again, is reminding us of that. In, again, fire, Aries, next to Neptune, retrograde. That story I've been talking about for a while. It's time to construct new mythos, new story, new origin stories that we can rely upon as we are trying to think about what the collective is. And when they move back into Pisces later in the year, both Saturn and Neptune, we're dipping our toes back into the deep waters, but we have dried out for a little bit. So what have we seen on shore as we go back into the depths to really sit in the nebulousness of creation, which is those deep waters? Remember, we come through water through that birth canal. Do we have more clarity about then the ephemeral spaces that are needed? Do we have more clarity about the mundane and why it is so important to have connection to the sacred? Because we've always had to have sacred and mundane in order to have societies. That is the foundation of helps us order our economic, political, and social systems. So sacredness is very important for the mundane, duality. Here we go back to Mercury. Mercury reminds us that because it is the crossroad. It is the one that can deliver messages from the sacred to the mundane and back and forth again. How do we know that? Well, Virgo, again, the stomach, your intuition. What do you just know? Right? We talk about the ancestors and speaking to our higher selves and speaking to our elevated dead and all of that. But how can you hear them if there is no space? If that kind of logic, the logic of the sacred that has many different logics and ways to engage, you've already removed yourself from even being a possibility because your sight is still filtered through the ways we have been trained to bifurcate our relationship between our minds and our bodies, bifurcate our communication to self, one another, and who we come from in the land itself. Then what happens if we reconstitute that? Well, we got to let go of this idea that there's only one way. that there is a right way, that there is a universal way to communicate and do things. Well, we're realizing that even if there is only one way, what we've been doing now ain't working. So regardless, some shit's got to change. Okay. And Mercury reminds us that that is what life is. Uranus is now in the mix saying, yeah, baby, this really is what life is. Relationship to change. So what is your relationship to change? Octavia Butler, people love, again, quoting Octavia's book, Parable of the Sower, and the concept of God that Lauren was constructing through Earthseed, which is God is change, right? And if we do understand that God is change, God being the kind of ordering of the universe, the way we understand living in life, well, then our relationship to change is on the table. And Uranus, the higher octave, the genius, the rebel, the one who not necessarily is going to play nice, they just understand their role is to do something different. We got to get clear about what that difference is. And so this kind of these transits are giving us that permission, and giving yourselves permission. It's not always going to be nice necessarily, y'all, but is it honest? Is it honest? And I think that's the other thing about Leo and the energy of Leo, and it being the sun, and it being vision, and it being light. Many times it's hard for us to see our own vision and light alongside seeing the vision and light of others, because it is very truthful. It tells the truth. Light reveals things, right? Especially in the dark. But when we don't tell the truth to ourselves, when we lie to ourselves, when we refuse to believe ourselves in our capacities and what we can and can't do, then we lie to others. And in that lying to self, therefore lying to others, we create structures of societies that are built on lies, built on a house of cards that we continue just to build on. But when the structure and foundation is not solid, when it was never real to begin with, when you keep piling on, it'll do what? It'll crack. And that's where we are right now. We're in a time in which the lies we've been fed, the way we talk about ourselves, understand ourselves and one another, have to grapple with these structures in society, right? This idea of the law, and well, the law will take care of it. No, it won't. We've seen this over and over again. The whole nation state was built upon a house of cards, built upon a construct of freedom that again required the subjugation of others. So it was a freedom for white men who had a certain social status because they wanted to be the new kings. And when the only template you have is the one that you are trying to get out of, but you've not really deconstructed, you've not really faced that, you just realize that you wanted some of that, just a little bit different. So you move that needle a bit, but you still got to fund that shit, right? You still got to fund your freedom. Well, then you might as well make somebody else the oppressor if that is the only way you understand freedom can be made and had through. But then we get fed this whole story about it was freedom for all. That was the opening. The French and the American revolutions opened up this whole new world order of the modern nation state, the West, that is about equality and fraternity of all. But again, we see that that was not true. History has shown us over and over again, it was never free again for all. So why are we so confused that in the present day, in 2025, we are now seeing the aftermaths of voting, or at least not being aware enough to see these patterns? So now we are facing an administration, not just in the US, but in a lot of these other Western nation state projects, in which an authoritarianism has to come out even more because it was never free. It was a facade, but since the facade is cracking, now they're just going to be much more direct with it. So do we believe? And if that logic doesn't make any sense, if this is not progress, and again, we're being fed this idea of AI technology, right? This idea of AI technology is somehow going to save us once again. But Mercury is saying, but is that true? Uranus is saying, but where does your genius lie? Where is your higher self? Because again, the higher octave, the genius, the downloads, if you have no space in your head, how can you then get downloads that are from your sense of self, your higher self, to help lead you in a way that will make sense for the self? So you can't lie to yourself. Mercury is saying, listen, I can be a trickster. Don't mean I'm lying to you. I ain't gonna lie to you to trick you. Because the trick is supposed to help you see the complexities of something. Things are not as black and white. And as a fixed sign myself, right? Again, Leo, Taurus moon, and this damn Leo's, I mean, Scorpio rising. I have a lot of fixed energy. There's a way that I can accidentally get very binary with myself. It must be this, or that. But in many times it never is. It is a fluidity between kind of two kind of poles. Again, the law of polarity. But since that law of polarity through the colonial project was completely kind of reinscribed into a strict binary, we're kind of being forced out of that binary back into nebulousness again. So this is about creation. And creating is a messy thing. It's very messy. So can we sit in the mess? Can we sit in the kind of unknown? And this is where Leo can shine, because this is about play. This is about children and childhood, because Leo also rules the children, also rules the child, because it rules the heart. So Mercury retrograde is saying, where is your heart? Where is your inner child? Do you have a relationship to that younger sense, yourself? And if you don't, what would it look like to re-engage with that younger self? What does that younger self really want? Was that younger self heard? And if he, she, they wasn't, then what does it look like for you to hear you, for you to play with you, for you to get curious with yourself? And in doing so, who else can get curious and play with you? And in that playing, in that creating, in that creation, oh shit, we can make new worlds here. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, y'all, but it is, if it is part of this ongoing story. And so the last thing I'll say to this, again, I'm going to go back to this idea of nihilism, because, and I've been yapping already, so this is also yapping, yapping time too, y'all. I'm still getting my head a bit back into the structures, so this is a bit more flowy as well this week. So if you don't mind, let me know. And if you got questions, please drop them in the comments, and I will get to them. I will get to the questions. But I want to go back to this idea of nihilism, because it's going to be, it is, we're in this tension too. Again, talking about stories and co-creation. It is really easy to fall into despair. It is really easy to fall into the fire and give yourself as tribute. Well, fuck it. They keep getting worse. There's nothing we can do. That's exactly what they want out of us. That's exactly what they need out of us. They need our complacency in one way, shape, or form. And you can get complacent through coercion, right, through violence and force, but that's a finite resource that does require some rest in some way, shape, or form. And so it needs your consent, and we get consent through nihilism. That is why they took the imagination and fed us back these last few decades all of these stories of futures that are so dystopian, right? But dystopian in most fantastical ways. In the most fantastical ways, because it's always some hero or heroine that comes and saves the day after centuries of brutality, right? It's usually a white lead who can somehow rally and defeat the empire, right? Defeat power. And that's a fantasy. Come on now. When has that ever been true, that the embodiment of the identities that help construct this fucked up order is somehow going to get us free? Why does whiteness want to get us free when it is the construct via the patriarch and patriarchy filtered through the kind of Christian doctrine of the great chain of being, right? Why would it get us free? That doesn't make any sense. So that's a fantasy. That's a fantasy that they need us to buy into as the inevitability of our future. But this is why Leo is so important right now, the drama, the storytelling, performance. What if we performed a different story? What if we performed a different script? Well, we have to write that bitch then, right? So what does it look like for you to be the performer of your life, to take back the script and rewrite it in a way that it is not about having some hero that saves everybody, but you understand that the only way you can save anything or anyone is by coming into and saving the self. So you got to bring that self out. You got to let that little light shine. But can you allow yourself to shine? Because in that shine, sometimes that light can be too bright for some. So they'll try to snuff it out. They'll try to move around it. They'll try to tell you to not be as much. But again, whose voice, whose construct is leading? And if you allow yourself to lead, then it will help you see the other selves, because light attracts light, y'all. This is what I love about Leo energy. It's what I love about fire energy in general, when it's grounded in the body and is comfortable with its own emotions, right? Comfortable with your feelings. Then light attracts light. I don't mind a bright light at all. I find it very attractive, both romantically, but also platonically, in business and friendship. Like, if we can bring our lights together and shine, then baby, what can the fuck we do? Because now we got more source. Now we got more energy. Now it's not just one person who has to carry the burden. We now have more light, which means we have more power. We have more energy, right? So I never understood this idea of, oh, you shine too bright and you only be one person. Who said it only has to be one? And has that worked for us? Right? So this week is really with these kind of, oh, I do believe people will be triggered, but it's not a bad thing, y'all. Sometimes that trigger gives you the clarity, because now you've given permission to review, to stop, reflect, and review, versus just reacting. And again, fire can't easily react. I know I can be reactive, but I'm only reacting many times when I don't want to sit with my emotion. When I don't want to grapple with, there's an uncomfortability here, or something's popping up, or I'm irritated, or I'm overly happy, but I'm a little weary because, it's always like, well, when's the next foot going to drop? Why? So I have to sit with that, which means I got to sit with my body and how it responds. This is Virgo. This is Virgo energy, because it's ruled by Mercury. It is the earth feminine version of Mercury. Mercury is in charge right now. And when it meets that sun, because next week we're going to have the Mercury, I think it's next week, Mercury Kazemi, but we also have a new moon happening as well. There is a spotlight then on you as the performer of your life. So whose life and what life are you leading, and why? Because that nihilism does nothing. It does nothing but feed the oppressor. It does nothing but give an offering to the altar of a monster, of a succubus energy. And I am sorry, I am too much of a Leo to let some asshole lead or some asshole win, right? This thing called life, because I have given up my offering to it. You got to take this shit from me, because I'm not giving it up anymore, right? And I think that is the kind of energy and perspective we do need, because that's what allows us to dream. Not fantasize, but dream. Fantasy and dream are not the same. We have been fed white fantasy that has always been based upon mythology of nothing more than a house of cards of lies that requires us to constantly feed it with our bodies and with our emotions. So that is how we become disconnected. That is how the family becomes a source of pain for many of us versus a location of comfort, because we have to be groomed into these systems through those structures. So if we realize that we don't have to do it this way, if we understand that dreaming is an actual technology, it's an ancestral technology that has always been accessed. It is the ways that we have been able to not just survive, but still thrive in these hellscapes. And that is why the Black body and Black culture is constantly commodified while also denigrated, because it is the backbone, it is the backdrop, it is the location and the foundation, the political economy, right? Through the plantation. Then if we realize that they need us, what happens when we then engage the technologies we have, which is the body and our dreams, which will then take us into different scapes, dreamscapes, landscapes, soundscapes, so we can remember something else, something different, something than before, that becomes the new catalyst of how we understand our present. This is time travel. This is real time travel. Saturn ruling time, retrograding, saying it's now time. We got to go back, way back into time. Nah, baby, nah, baby, nah, baby. I love that. That's one of my favorite Blackstreet songs, y'all. But we do got to go back in time. But whose time are we going back into, and how are we working with it? It's not just going back and thinking of it as stagnant. We have to go back into time, back into different timelines, and ask ourselves then what makes the most sense. So this, again, is a re-engagement of our ways to communicate, how we communicate, and what we communicate through the different logics. In the Western colonial project, Western knowledge production, Western science is only one logic, not the only one. And it is a logic that has not actually helped us logically understand the human, but it is a logic that is taking us full blown into a new industrial revolution with the promise of AI technology that is going to make more of us much more sick and even much more ignorant. While the state then shows more of its ass because the facade has crumbled, no longer will it say it's really for freedom and democracy. Now it's just going to say that it is doing its best. It is what needs to happen. It becomes the new paternal figure because we are now being asked to move away from the nation state into the technocratic state. And that to me is much more terrifying because the borders and boundaries are now going to get even more rigid. And instead of it being a landmass, it's now going to be you, your mind, and what you log into. So if we don't want that as the only future possible, then it's time to take our time back by taking back the body and taking back our spirit of creation and creativity, which means we have to take back our heart. And Mercury Retrograde is going to be reminding us about our hearts along with the sun. And it's going to be kind of, when we say dramatic, I think it sounds worse than what it is because we only understand drama as negative. But again, drama is another aspect of living. It reminds us that we are alive. So do you know that you're living? Can you feel your heart? Can you feel your heart, y'all? And if it hurts some, it's okay. It's not going to last forever. I do mean that. But you're going to have to feel because eventually that feeling will catch up. It'll catch up in a moment, in a time. Even if you try to drink it away, smoke it away, fuck it away, shop it away, whatever it is, it will still show up, right? Solange was not playing when she said, I tried to drink it away, smoke it away, do all kinds of things, right? But at the end of the day, I still had to come back and face myself. So might as well do it on your own terms versus having it knocking on your ass. Because take it from me, that has happened to me plenty of times. And once I got tired of his having it knock me out and I started to face it by facing myself, by sitting in and realizing that, yes, I do feel emotions very deeply, y'all. It's a way that they come over me, they wash over me, and they erupt in me in a way. And it took me being able to find people who were not afraid of their own emotions, who could sit with mine, who could speak back to me that was just my way of processing. I'm fire still. I'm fire. Even Scorpio, I'm ruled by Mars. So my fire is through water, Mars being in Cancer. So there is a way that I have to release through steam. Fire and water together makes steam. So if I don't want it to kind of steam me up internally, because that's where that inflammation came from, I must be able to release. But that release should not just be in this kind of whoa reaction. The release, though, is in the actual engagement and expression of the feeling. And what I've had to learn, I'm going to end with this, y'all, is I've had to learn that me expressing my emotions and being able to speak them, articulate them, express them, work with them, does make a lot of people uncomfortable. Makes a lot of folks uncomfortable, I'm realizing. And that's why I do work with astrology, because when I looked at my chart again and asked myself the question, if I don't see myself as always the problem, then what is my chart showing me in terms of my energy? That's when it was like, it felt like it was like a highlighted almost, my Uranus and Lilith on my ascendant trine my Mars in Cancer, my chart ruler. So I carry, again, like I said this before, I carry the energy of chaos. I carry the energy of change. I carry the energy of queering things. Because as my friend Forrest says, he sees Uranus energy as a queering of an energy, which I completely agree in the modern, if thinking about it in present day language. And so for me, it is different to have to, it's uncomfortable because we are taught to remove ourselves from our emotions. And for me, I say that makes absolutely no logical sense. It is by us engaging with and working with and understanding them that we can truly become human again. And in that humanity, that's when we can truly live. That's when we can actually live. So, do we want to live? And if we do, what are we creating? Because again, we're only going to save ourselves. Who is the self you are saving? And might as well be a big ass Leo about it and make that shit beautiful, make it pop, make it so that it shines and it lasts so future generations can have that vision and continue to create from it. Okay? All right, y'all, let me stop there. That is my weekly reflections for this upcoming Leo season. And we're going to be talking more about Leo for these next couple of weeks, or a few weeks, I should say. So next week, like I mentioned earlier, we get the Kazemi, I'm pretty sure, happening, but also this new moon in Leo. So we're going to be talking more about that and getting still more into the storytelling via the idea of childhood, childlike things, and curiosity. So in this week, as you're going through, again, track your emotions, y'all, in some way, shape, or form. And work with the element of your sun, if you can, right? The element of your sun as a way to figure out how to essentially embody your form. No. Track your emotions, okay? And in that tracking, ask yourself, what are you feeling? Where in the body do you feel it? What does that feeling feel like? And get curious about then, what is that feeling trying to tell you? But sometimes we need a little bit to even understand we are in and having a feeling. So that's why you want to track what the feeling is, what it feels like, and where it's located as a way to what I call do an ethnographic self-study. All right. Now, if you want to learn more about that, again, I talk about that more on my Patreon as part of my praxis, Embodied Strategic Dreaming. That's what I'm writing my book on currently. So for more information about that and to support me in my writing and my book, please check out my Patreon along with my website, drnicolerouse.com. Okay. All right. And as always, keep dreaming, keep exploring, because it's through the dreamscape that we can bring the dreams we say we want into the present. Till next time. I don't want to be right. I just want to be free. Like Michelle sang, the cosmos, where we come from. The light that lit the way for our ancestors in the dark of night, when they had to leave the spaces that tried to steal their breath and life. Reworking, while also learning how to work with the land that was also being worked. A land and people under duress. The trees did not ask if they wanted to participate in such brutal practices. Yet here they were. Here we are. All beholden to a power structure that only knows how to take and never to give, while telling us this is the right way to live. So I don't want to be right. I just want to be free. As Michelle sang, the cosmos. Imagine that freedom lied in parable of the sower that sowed the seeds of earth's seed that wanted to bring humans back to the stars, to start again, to start anew. Remember where we come from and who we are. The stars that lit the way, that guide the light. The moon that holds the tides of the waters, our connection to earth and land. As above, so below, yet we don't know, because we have lost the above and the below. So I don't want to be right, I just want to be free and journey to the cosmos.